9 out of the top 10 global research institutions in the entire world, 9 of them are now located in just one single country. Think about that for a second. For over a decade, the absolute pinnacle of global science was a landscape completely dominated by the West. But as of the newly released 2026 data, well, that era has quietly and officially ended. We're witnessing an unprecedented structural anomaly here, and it literally happened right in front of us. I'm your host, and today we're launching a full investigation into the hard facts, the numbers, and the undeniable trends coming out of the latest Nature Index and the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Our mission in this explainer, to decode this massive global realignment in scientific supremacy. We're talking no politics, just the raw data. We're going to look way beyond the daily headlines to uncover the actual mechanics of how the global research ecosystem has fundamentally transformed. Just look at this headline for a moment, from South China Morning Post. This is the news behind today's video. China is now world's #1 science power. Top Russian scientist Artem Oganov says, after receiving Chinese award, chemist and materials researcher says it gives him confidence that he's on the right track. With that said, let's go straight to the intro. The algorithm buries. So the mission is to decode this 2026 data. And to do that, our next steps are to investigate the funding driving the shift, map out the institutional monopolies holding all this power, and finally expose the risks to critical technologies. The evidence is definitely complex, but the trajectory, it's undeniable. Section 1, the evidence, redrawing the global map. For 10 solid years, Harvard sat virtually untouched at the #1 academic spot globally. It was just a given, right? A constant in the scientific world. But this 2026 data reveals an absolute seismic shakeup. Zhejiang University has officially surpassed Harvard, and towering above them both, way beyond the traditional academic sphere, is the new global leader, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, or CAS. Now you gotta understand, this isn't a victory by some slim margin. It's a total ecosystem takeover. It's driving a massive structural surge in high-quality research that has entirely reshaped the hierarchy of human knowledge. To really grasp the scale of what the Chinese Academy of Sciences is pulling off here, you just have to wrap your head around this number, 30. Out of 74 critical technologies tracked globally by ASPI, the Chinese Academy of Sciences holds the absolute first-place position in 30 of them. I mean, this is an unparalleled concentration of institutional dominance. Just to put that into perspective for a second, the top domestic leader in the United States, MIT, ranks in the top 10 for only 8 of these technologies. CAS alone leads in 30. It's a scale of scientific centralization the modern world has literally never seen before. And this dominance, it's highly concentrated. CAS ranks first globally in physical sciences, chemistry, biological sciences, applied sciences, and earth sciences. Now, the West does still retain a firm grip on health and social sciences, but what we're talking about here is a targeted masterclass execution in monopolizing the hard sciences and engineering. It's a deliberate restructuring of exactly where foundational scientific breakthroughs actually originate. Section 2, tracing the R&D billions, the 2024 investment shift. Let's be real, science is incredibly expensive. It demands immense sustained capital. And 2024 was the crossover event that changed history forever. Adjusted for purchasing power parity, China eclipsed the United States in absolute gross domestic expenditures on R&D, hitting a staggering $1.028 trillion. Together, these two nations now account for nearly 60% of all global research performance. But you know, the raw dollar amount kind of hides the true mystery here, because it's not just about how much they're spending, it's about how they're spending it. We're actually dealing with two completely diverging national strategies. China's engine is fueled by state funding, directed relentlessly at advanced laboratories and foundational basic research, and it's growing at 10% annually. They're playing the long game. The US strategy, on the other hand, is heavily dominated by the business sector. This means Western funding is largely tethered to near-term commercial products. Rushing the market, focusing on those quarterly returns, rather than laying the expensive, patient groundwork for true foundational scientific discovery. But hey, capital alone doesn't just conjure up innovation out of thin air. You need minds. 53,000. That is roughly the number of science and engineering doctorates recently awarded in a single year in China. Compare that to the approximately 45,000 awarded by US institutions. China has systematically built this unprecedented domestic talent pipeline while simultaneously going out and recruiting elite global scientists like the renowned Russian crystallographer Artem Ogunov, bringing them in to lead newly minted state-of-the-art facilities. They're basically centralizing the world's intellectual capital. Section 3. The Monopoly Risk Factor: Securing Critical Technologies. Now, the 2026 ASPE data reveals a pretty chilling metric. Out of the 74 tracked critical technologies, China now poses a high monopoly risk in 41 of them. And high monopoly risk isn't just some dramatic buzzword. It's a strict mathematical reality. It means a country is publishing more than 3 times as much high-impact research as its nearest competitor, and it physically houses 8 or more of the top 10 global research institutions in that specific field. Bottom line, it means the race in that sector is, for all intents and purposes, currently won. So what fields are we actually talking about here? Well, the list is basically the very foundation of the future. Artificial intelligence, which dictates everything from predictive algorithms to global logistics. Advanced materials. Defense robotics, which is going to entirely reshape autonomous systems operations and global security. And information technologies. Now, I should objectively note a recent data refresh here. Brain-computer interfaces were actually downgraded to an intermediate risk, meaning global expertise in that specific niche has become a bit more distributed. But the broader overarching trend across critical technologies, it remains absolutely clear. Section 4. Case Study: Dominating Genetic Engineering. Genetic engineering was once the undisputed domain of the United States. Today, it's categorized as a high monopoly risk for China. This is a masterclass in strategic execution. They didn't just fund it, they overwhelmed it. They're producing 3 times more high-impact papers, they host 8 of the top 10 global institutions, and, brilliantly, they integrated synthetic biology directly into industrial pipelines, basically turning slow lab research into massive rapid manufacturing. It's this seamless loop from theoretical biology straight to industrial dominance. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter to us? Because theoretical monopolies have very real-world consequences. Domestically bred crops engineered through these exact genetic advances now cover over 95% of China's farmland. They've biologically secured their national food supply. They've insulated themselves from global agricultural shocks. And simultaneously, they're spinning off world-first innovative drugs. The era of imitation is completely over. This is foundational, original creation happening at an industrial scale. Section 5. The Multipolar Realignment: Unintended Consequences. This structural collapse in the West definitely didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, decades-long bleed. Back in 1964, US federal R&D investment peaked at an ambitious 1.86% of its GDP. But by 2021, that federal lifeblood had plummeted to just 0.66%. Fast forward to 2026, and Western nations are locked in a structural decline in basic scientific funding. Meanwhile, China stands alone as the only country in the global top 10 achieving double-digit growth. It's literally a tale of 2 entirely different historical trajectories intersecting in real time. And this leads us to a fascinating yet deeply alarming concept analysts are calling the stockyard paradox. So, in an attempt to protect its technological lead, the US and other Western nations implemented these highly restrictive national security policies on research sharing. But here's the paradox. By building higher walls to restrict access, you inadvertently isolate your own domestic scientific community. You prevent your own researchers from accessing the breakthroughs that are now occurring at the new global frontier. A frontier which, as the data clearly shows, is increasingly located outside the West. The human toll of this paradox is honestly staggering. According to the source data, because of these restrictive funding policies and access issues, international applications to U.S. programs have plummeted. And get this, currently, an estimated 75% of US-based researchers are considering leaving. Yeah, when you pair this looming brain drain with China's aggressive, incredibly well-funded global recruitment programs, you can see the mechanics of a multipolar realignment happening right before our eyes. Analysts are suggesting the window for Western countries to reverse this trajectory is rapidly narrowing. As this research leadership cements into a permanent structural condition of the global technology landscape, we really have to ask, will the rest of the world become structurally dependent on a single new scientific superpower for its intellectual property, its advanced manufacturing, and its entire technological future? It's a question that's going to define the survival and innovation of the next century. And honestly, the data suggests the answer might already be here. That concludes our investigation into the 2026 global shift. Thank you so much for joining the Explainer today. Keep questioning the data, stay curious, and goodbye.